I'm going to continue now in my series of videos dealing with the ending of the Old Testament Sabbath, and I'm going to stay in the book of Genesis and Exodus for a moment. And I found a statement the other day made by a Seventh-day Adventist who made a video, and he made a statement in the video: the Sabbath command itself tells us that it went into effect at creation. This is a primary example of someone who is Bible illiterate and doesn't do the proper research before they make a statement. First of all, the Sabbath command in Exodus doesn't say anything about the Shabbat in Genesis chapter 2, so it doesn't say anything about it going into effect at creation. In fact, in Nehemiah chapter 9 verse 13 and 14, you read there where God made it known to them at Sinai. It says his holy Sabbath he made known to them at Mount Sinai. So here's God's words directly contradicting what the Seventh-day Adventist himself said. And if he'd have done the proper research, he would have read Nehemiah and found out that the Sabbath command was being revealed for the first time now at Mount Sinai. So the Bible itself shows that how inaccurate he is in making that statement when the Bible itself contradicts it. But another thing he doesn't understand is that the word Sabbath is not used in Genesis whatsoever. The Sabbath, as he thinks it is, the noun Sabbath, the word used in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 for rest, it's unfortunate that the King James Bible put the word rest there when it means to cease, and is the word Shabbath, meaning to cease. God doesn't need to rest because he doesn't get tired, and it simply means that God ceased his creative activities. And if you will notice in there where it says on the seventh day God rested, or he ceased his activities, there's absolutely no command there whatsoever given. The only command actually given to Adam and Eve was to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And to say that Adam and Eve kept the Sabbath in his old argument is from silence. He has nothing to support it whatsoever, other than just to make a blanket statement that Adam and Eve did it in observing the Sabbath, when no command was ever given to them to do that. And again, the Hebrew word used in Genesis is Shabbath. Now that is a primitive root word, meaning that it stands alone. It didn't come from any other word. It stands alone. The word Sabbath is used in Exodus is not a primitive root word. Now the word Sabbath can come from Shabbat, but the word Shabbat cannot come from Sabbath because it's a primitive word standing by itself. So the two words are even totally different. Other cases of primitive roots for the word rest can be found in Exodus chapter 23:11, where it means to discontinue. It's a primitive root word again. Exodus 23:12 is a word that means to be quiet or to be still. It's again a primitive root word. And Exodus 28:10 is another primitive root of rest, meaning to be left behind or to remain. Those are all primitive root words, just like Shabbat in Genesis. It stands alone. It didn't come from another word. Other words may be derived from those words, but they stand alone. They weren't derived from anything. And that's what this Seventh-day Adventist member didn't understand either, is that while the word Shabbat may come from, while the word Sabbath may come from Shabbat, Shabbat cannot come from the word Sabbath because it's a primitive root word. So he is totally illiterate in explaining that, and to think that just by simply making a statement that settles it. But yet Seventh-day Adventists are good at that, by throwing a bunch of verses out there as though that settles an issue. And what they never do is explain those verses themselves. They'll just say, go read this or go read that. And when I ask them to explain them, I don't hear from them for days. So it's irrelevant what it means to me. If I'm going to answer somebody's arguments against it, you have to know what those verses mean to the person making the statement. And if you happen to watch these person videos, you'll find out that he doesn't explain any of those verses. He just puts them out there and never gives any explanation to them whatsoever. never goes back into it and interprets those verses to see what he means by it. So it's kind of like, I really don't know what these mean, but I'll put them out there anyway. It's like kind of like SDA have a cheat sheet of verses. Well, I'll put this one out there, or I'll put this one out there, but they never explain what those verses mean. For one reason, they don't explain them because they knew if they explained them, they could be taken apart real easy, and they were shown to be that much more Bible illiterate and not being able to interpret those verses either. So that's why they throw them out there with never explaining them, because they don't know how to interpret them. That's just a simple fact. They don't know how to interpret them. But to give any suggestion whatsoever that the Sabbath command beginning creation is just basically an argument from silence, because after Genesis chapter 2 and 48 verses, the Sabbath is never mentioned again. It's not mentioned for the first time as the Sabbath until the book of Exodus. It's always the word Shabbat. And I'll defy any Seventh-day Adventist to give me any incident where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Noah, any of them ever kept the Sabbath. There's not a case in the entire Genesis where they ever kept the Sabbath. That doesn't mean they didn't rest on the Sabbath day, but it wasn't called the Sabbath. And they want to say that Adam and Eve had the Sabbath command, but yet they give no verses, give no indication, give no support for their theory whatsoever. And again, when it says God rested, show me in there whatsoever where there is a command given. It just simply said God ceased from his work. In other words, he ceased the creative activities. There is not a command given there anywhere. Which is again, this is typical of Seventh-day Adventists, to try to trick people into believing something that isn't so. And here's what they do: they'll go back to their churches or where they want to, and holler they're being persecuted because somebody disagreed with them. Oh, can't you see Satan's working through them? Just because you get it right and they send it right for the first time, that's just part of the brainwashing outfit that cults always do. They scare you into believing something that isn't true. And if their people see something that is right, then they say, oh, don't believe them, Satan's working through them. That's not a very good way to prove your point. And by making statements that you don't even back up is surely not a way to prove your point. So to the Seventh-day Adventist, or any of them, give me one place in the book of Genesis where the Sabbath, as you know it, is ever given as a command. It never is. Until next time, this has been Golly saying, God bless.